we've got to start messaging a lot better than we do. One of the reasons why I think this is so important is because most people imagine that Texas is a red state. Most people think that Galveston County voted Democrat or Republican this last time. Most people in Galveston County didn't vote. It's not. But what's happening is we're not getting the word out. We're kind of a secret organization. That's why we get in a smaller room. What's happening is that the Republicans and the radical Republicans are living in an echo chamber that's getting louder and louder. And we've got to break that cycle. There's relatively few of them. They talk a lot, and because they only hear each other, they think that's the only information out there. And because we're not talking as much as we ought to be, we're not standing up for our positions as much as we ought to be, they are, the other people are hearing it, and people don't agree with them, they just don't vote. Because they don't know the alternative. They don't really understand what the alternative stands for. All they hear is what they're hearing. If you go to any one of the websites, that for any of the newspapers, you follow an article and you do the comment, like go to one of mine, they're a fairly liberal column, the Galveston Daily News, every 2 weeks. Turns out that 90% of the comments about it aren't in favor of what I'm saying. They're not really in favor of third grade education. And they're largely a fact-free zone, but that's what people are seeing. And there's a lot more ink or pixels being applied to them than there is to our message. So we've got to start getting our message out. So let's talk a little bit about newspapers. Most people think that newspapers are all about this stuff. It's not true. Newspapers are about this stuff.
Yes.
Everything that's not this stuff is a problem for them. Which is why they're not particularly inclined to support anything that doesn't pay them in one way or another. The way you pay them, the way they get value out of this is eyeballs and advertising. We don't have the money to pay for advertising, so we've got to be providing eyeballs. So what happens is, when somebody like Heber Taylor or Hellenberger or some of the people who are Donna Hatch from the Chronicles Clear Lake section are looking at what news stories to write and what to communicate, they're trying to figure out what people are reading, what people are wanting to hear. How do they know? They're sitting in an office. They don't run polls. They know because of what information comes into them. Either through those comments, which they generally don't read much of because that's a pain, but through the letters to the editor. When you think about writing a letter to the editor, first thing you got to think about is you're writing a letter to the editor. Because how is he knowing, or she knowing, what information people want to hear about? It's what information people respond to. They're setting their editorial policy not because they have a political agenda, although some do and some don't, some have more or less. They're setting it not to support our side or even necessarily the other side. They're setting it because it draws eyeballs. How do they learn about their eyeballs? It's because what we tell them. We're reading. We're responding to it. Because they can't really tell. They just put the paper out there. They don't know what people are reading and responding to until they get feedback. I was talking to Nick Adams the other day. He said breakfast with Heber Taylor, and saying Heber told him that he has 800 submissions every week.
For what? For letters to the editor?
Letters to the editor and guest calls.
Wow.
I feel pretty honored that he'll run one of mine every 2 weeks. But remember, so most of what is coming in doesn't get into the paper. That does not mean it is not useful, because he's reading them all. He's looking them over, and consciously or unconsciously, and mostly consciously, he's paying attention to what people are saying. That's his pulse. And if that pulse is being dominated by the radical right wing, then that's the way he's going to slant, even if that's not his own personal bias. Because that's what people are responding to, that's what people are reading. So we've got to be there. It's critical that we're there. And even if we're not getting published, it's critical. So that's kind of the background of why it's important and what's going on and why we need to be there. Because messaging is what it's about. And it not only shapes what they publish, but it shapes everything else they do. It shapes how they look at things. So it's important to be there.